Wednesday, March 14th, 2018 meeting of the Portland City Council. Commissioner Udaley is unable to attend today's meeting. Her failure to participate in today's council session would jeopardize the public interest, health, safety, or welfare. Therefore, unless there's an objection by any member of the council, Commissioner Udaley will participate in today's hearing by teleconference. Are there any objections? Hearing no objections, Carla, please ask Commissioner Udaley to participate by teleconference.
Commissioner Udaley, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Carla, please call the roll.
Fritz?
Here.
Fish? Saltzman? Udaley?
Here.
Wheeler?
Here. So, folks, just a little bit of housekeeping this morning. We're going to get through communications. I'm going to call a recess at 9:50 a.m. until 10:30 a.m. A number of commissioners have been asked to join our young people at their respective schools as they highlight the importance of safety in their schools. I have chosen to participate, and I believe a number of my colleagues have chosen to participate. We will reconvene at 10:30, and at 10:30 we will take up the consent agenda. We'll take up the appointment that is on the time certain agenda at 9:45, followed by the USS Portland Commissioning Committee presentation. And we have notified those folks that there will be this delay. I had said yesterday that I would recess the City Council for 17 minutes in observation and support of the students and their demonstrations. But subsequently, we were invited to actually stand with the students. I was asked to stand with the students at Lincoln High School, and I think there is no better way than I could demonstrate my support for their efforts than by being there in person, and a number of my colleagues are doing the same. Commissioner Fritz.
I will be at St. Mary's.
Very good. Commissioner Fritz will be at St. Mary's. I'll be at Lincoln. So with that, Carla, could you please call the first communications?
Item 236.
I'm sorry, Carla. Michelle, what is? Oh, Robert.
Would you like me to read the statement?
Could we do that maybe
Oh, I'm
later
sorry.
after communications? I mean, when we reconvene?
Yeah, let's do it at 10:30. I think we're good for now.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. Please call the first communications item.
Item 236, request of Craig Rogers to address council regarding zombie houses. He contacted the office and is not able to make it.
Very good. Next item, please.
237, request of Luann Moldovan to address council to advocate for increased budget for Portland Police Bureau.
Come on up. 3 minutes.
Yes.
It'll blink red when your time is up, so please finish at 3 minutes. If you could just state your name for the record. We do not need to know your address. Please let us know if you're a lobbyist or here representing an organization. Thank you.
I'm Luann Moldovan. I'm just a civilian. Good morning, Mayor Wheeler,
morning.
Commissioners Fritz and Udaley. Once upon a time, in an ever-growing metropolis, there lived a hard-working, middle-aged woman named Frances. Married for 3 decades to her beloved William, both were devastated by his diagnosis of early-onset Alzheimer's. Critical lifestyle adjustments were made and revised accordingly as the disease escalated further. One day, Will hopped on his bicycle for a trek to their nearby marketplace. Ever watchful Frances fretted as his return home was delayed, and her anxiety mounted when she could not reach him on his cell phone. Frances called the police. An officer arrived promptly, and while she was taking notes, Will called to say he was at Ye Olde 7-Eleven, approximately 12 miles away. The police officer instructed Will to stay put. That help would arrive shortly. As the officer's vehicle was a sedan, she reached out to the appropriate precinct and requested an officer retrieve Will with an SUV. Within minutes, a policeman arrived, loaded Will's bicycle and Will into his vehicle, and transported both safely back home. They lived, well, not exactly happily ever after. This is not a fairy tale. This is an anecdotal example of how our understaffed, overworked police bureau overcomes the odds for the sake of serving their mission. I, like most people, fear and detest the police when sirens shriek behind me and I think, was I speeding? Damn, I was speeding. Did he notice? Damn, he noticed. A rather too common occurrence in my life. But when the police swiftly appear at my house, case the place, and assure me it's safe after I returned home late one night to find my door ajar, or when I witness them with much care and patience handling a woman in a cafe with a severe mental breakdown, when I enjoy their friendly, supportive attitude at last year's Women's March, when my friend tells me one night a cop stopped him because he was driving a VW bus with one headlight, no taillights, no tags, no driver's license, and a bag of weed on the seat, the cop just started laughing, told him to go straight home and fix all that, excuse my language, shit, ASAP. Or when a police officer comes upon an abandoned van, searches for the owner, and through his friends, finds a homeless man in a vacant building with his dogs, takes him to the van, helps him walk the dogs for several blocks, then returns another day to follow up and make sure the man was okay and the dogs were okay. When police commit acts of courage and kindness, then gee, I'm bursting with gratitude. The police are accustomed to our fluctuating attitudes. They are dedicated to policing exceptionally, to connecting compassionately, to defending ferociously, building relationships and trust, engaging with community, and acting or working proactively takes time and energy and money. Help them help us increase the budget for the Portland Police. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. We appreciate it. Next person, please.
Item 238, request of Joel Syme to address council regarding NATO phonetic alphabet to be used in radio transmissions of emergency agencies.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Good morning, Mayor.
Morning.
Commissioner. Joel Syme, I'm just a citizen of Portland. My thing is listening to emergency broadcast communications. I became aware of they do not use the NATO phonetic alphabet in vocal transmissions of information when they need to spell it out. Everybody's using their own version of a phonetic alphabet, but they aren't using this. This is used by the military and aircraft pilots and professional people. And what kind of astounds me is that when two people are talking, they use their own version. So when they spell it out phonetically, I've got to think of I got to think of the definition of a word. But, if they use this military standard, both people are on the same page, and they're not. And what happens is I feel there's a frustration build up, and, they're working hard enough as it is. And I'm amazed that none of the emergency agencies around here use it. And you talk about times of crisis and stuff, but you have to communicate with a military agency. They all use this. And if you start doing phonetics and you're not on the same page, there's a lot of frustration. There's not time to bring people up to speed. And I feel that I find it astounding that nobody's ever brought this up before. And that's why I'm here. This is, you got to look into it, and it's a top-down decision policy to get and it's really easy to learn and use. And I could do it, anybody can do it. So that's why I'm here. I just, find it astounding that through all this, infrastructure and everything, dealing with all this stuff over the years, nobody's ever brought this up. That's it. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Joel. Commissioner Fritz?
And just to clarify for folks at home, I thank you for giving us this full alphabet. So you're
Yeah,
talking
that's it.
You're supposed to say V as in Victor and B as in Bravo rather than V as in Victory and
Well,
B
see,
as
like
in Bob.
if I was communicating somebody, let's say Andy, they would say Ann, Nick, David, Yellow, which should be Alpha, November, Delta, Yankee. If I got that, yeah.
Got it.
And it just rolls out, and there's, it's a mental thing. And I'm just really amazed, and over the years, nobody's ever brought this up.
Thank you for doing so.
That's it. That's all I have to say.
Excellent. Well done.
Okay,
Thank you
thanks.
for your testimony.
You bet.
We appreciate it. We'll see you soon. Next individual, please, Carla.
Item 239, request of Valerie Illuster to address council regarding banning wood fires in the city limits.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for
Valerie
sending.
Illustre, Citizen S. And I'm addressing the two people who actually responded to my email immediately. Thank you very much. And it's a privilege to address the entire council. I'm going to devote one of my minutes to the students, so I'm going to be very quick. Wood smoke within city limits is, I think, an issue whose time has come. I sent you the information on the toxicity of wood smoke, and there's simply no question scientifically that wood smoke is one of the most, maybe the most toxic pollutant in our air. It's very difficult to ask people to give up something that's traditional and something that they enjoy for the good of the whole. But burning wood in your fireplace at home or in a wood stove really is very dangerous for your neighbors and for yourself. Within the home where you're burning, you immediately have a toxic environment. In fact, I would think that OHSU and others would agree that if you are heating your home with wood fires, that's actually probably child abuse if you have children. That's how toxic it is. And of course, we don't want to go there, but in general, I think that a program of public education would be very persuasive. And here in Portland, you have a tradition of being out ahead of these issues and progressive decisions. For example, with your tenant relocation allowance, when people are priced out of housing, you immediately gave dignity to renters, and you gave them a sense of security. If the city would go further than the Multnomah alert system, which really is unenforceable and doesn't work, because by the time that there's a red alert sounded for a red alert indicated for pollution, people have already been toxified, and in fact, many people won't know about it or won't obey it. A city ban would be enforceable in the same way that any other observable violation is enforceable by city police. And I think that people would not burn. I think they would be willing to, in a few years, phase out fireplaces and not sell homes that have wood-burning fireplaces. And, I think over time you could get full public cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, and I certainly appreciated the report that you'd sent all of us as commissioners. I found it very informative, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
And so I just wanted to mention that I did look into this when I was in charge of the Bureau of Development Services, and at that time we decided that Multnomah County was the better entity to do this, partly because smoke doesn't respect city boundaries. So they, Commissioner Sharon Myron and Commissioner Baker Peterson are working on the issue and have recently enacted an ordinance. I don't know your opinion, maybe you can send me later your opinion of their ordinance, but that's the way we've chosen to go.
I just hope you'll take another look at what other cities are doing, because I think there's new thinking on it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Carla, last individual, please.
Item 240, request of Jesse Banks to address council regarding City Hall Commissioners Law.
Is Mr. Banks here? We do not have Mr. Banks. There is one more item that I would like to take care of, and Valerie hinted at this. Before we take a recess until 10:30 a.m. this morning, could we please all observe a minute of silence in memory of all of those at Florida's Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. Thank you. We are in recess until 10:30. back in session. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. It was very much appreciated. Item number 241, please.
Mr. Mayor, would you like me to read the statement?
Yes, please, Robert. Thank you for reminding me.
Welcome to the Portland City Council. The City Council represents all Portlanders and meets to do the city's business. The presiding officer preserves order and decorum during City Council meetings, so everyone can feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe. To participate in council meetings, you may sign up in advance with the council clerk's office for communications to briefly speak about any subject. You may also sign up for public testimony on resolutions or the first readings of ordinances. Your testimony should address the matter being considered at the time. When testifying, please state your name for the record. Your address is not necessary. Please disclose if you are a lobbyist. If you are representing an organization, please identify it. The presiding officer determines the length of testimony. Individuals generally have 3 minutes to testify, unless otherwise stated. When you have 30 seconds left, a yellow light goes on. When your time is done, a red light goes on. If you are in the audience and would like to show your support for something that is said, please feel free to do a thumbs up. If you want to express that you do not support something, please feel free to do a thumbs down. Disruptive conduct, such as shouting or interrupting testimony or council deliberations, will not be allowed. If there are disruptions, a warning will be given that further disruption may result in the person being ejected for the remainder of the meeting. After being ejected, a person who fails to leave the meeting is subject to arrest for trespass. Thank you for helping your fellow Portlanders feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe.
Thank you, Robert. Item number 241, please.
Appoint Hillary Hauk to the Citizen Review Committee Advisory Board to the Independent Police Review, a division of the City Auditor's Office.
Director Sevier. Good morning. Thank you for your patience.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. It is my pleasure, let me introduce myself, Constantine Sevier, Director of the City of Portland's Independent Police Review. It is my pleasure this morning to present to you Hillary Hauk for your appointment to the Citizen Review Committee. Ms. Hauk has spent a career of providing help and services to community members who need a hand up. One of the most important parts of the Citizen Review Committee is, particularly service on the CRC, is having experience with a diversity of folks in the city. One of our issues historically at the Citizen Review Committee is not having a lot of diversity of experience with those around us in our community. And one of the things that we've tried to do with our recruitment is provide applicants that council can appoint to the CRC who have that experience. And Ms. Hauk and her professional career, which you have in front of you, speaks to, one, the quality of applicants that we have been very fortunate to have, and it is a huge ask that the city makes to community members like Ms. Hauk, who is so distinguished in her career, to be able to serve on the CRC, which is a very important task and is a very, honestly, a difficult task, because you hear about issues that, often might not make the news, but are very important to the lives of the community members who bring appeals of misconduct cases to the Citizen Review Committee. And frankly, as somebody who lives in the city of Portland, we need folks like Ms. Hauk who will listen with an open ear to the concerns of both community members and police officers. And I believe she is ready to talk briefly about her background.
Great.
If you would like.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks. Good morning.
Morning. Thank you for this opportunity. I just want to say that I'm interested in this to be part of the accountability process for the Portland Police Bureau and to really work on some policy reform as it comes up. If you have specific questions about my background, let me know.
Well, your background looks fascinating. It looks like you've lived all over the world. And I'm impressed with your work, particularly around poverty and housing instability and homelessness. That's obviously front and center here in the city. How do you think you can bring those skills to bear as a member of the CRC? What do you hope to accomplish, or what perspective do you hope to provide?
So I've worked in the field of homeless and houseless services for about 13 years. And I think that that's a perspective that's largely left out of the main conversation, because when you're homeless or houseless, you don't have the bandwidth necessarily to participate, and you're not necessarily believed. And so I think having that experience will help bring those voices front and center.
Very good. And as you know, I happen to be the police commissioner in addition to mayor, as luck would have it.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of issues with homelessness and making sure that we are acting appropriately and accountably. And I think the CRC does a great job of holding our feet to the fire to make sure that we do. So I think that's a useful experience to be bringing to the commission at this particular time.
I appreciate that.
Commissioner Fritz?
Thank you for being willing to serve, and thank you for being here today. I appreciate the transparency in your application, where the question was, describe any relationships or experiences that could create the appearance of positive or negative perceptions for or against the police. And your response was, I support anti-white supremacy causes publicly on social media, while I do not believe that is anti-police. Some may align the two. I thought that was very insightful. Have you thought about how your social media use might or might not change if you're appointed as a city body, to a city body?
Yes, I have thought about it. I mean, I don't think I'll change my politics, but I might not share as much if it's looked at more closely.
And certainly you'll have a training on those kinds of things. It's something I think that when I was a volunteer, it's more of a step than you might realize to suddenly be potentially considered a spokesperson for the city, even if you are doing your own private stuff. So thank you thank you for that transparency.
Thank you.
Very good. Is there any public testimony on this item?
Yes, we have one person signed up,
Very good.
Dan Handelman.
Thank you.
Mr. Handelman. Good morning.
Morning, Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners Fritz and Daly. I'm Dan Handelman with Portland Cop Watch. We do not have any particular concerns about the nominee for the Citizen Review Committee. We're actually very excited about the discussion you were just having, that Ms. Houck's background is in the field of housing and houselessness. That has been something that's been lacking on the Citizen Review Committee for a long time. We've been actually bringing that up at City Council inductions of CRC members for a while, so this is a good step forward. Ms. Houck is replacing Maricea Rivera, who resigned in December. Roberto Rivera, who's not related to her, announced his resignation at the CRC meeting last week, so he too will need to be replaced soon. We're hoping that his replacement will be a retiree or person over the age of 60, since none of the 10 current members of CRC are over the age of 57. I did make a mistake last time I testified about that. There's one member who's either 56 or 57 at this point. Ms. Houck is in her 30s. So, they have, the people who are retired have more time to commit to not only hearing the appeals, but also to the work groups that are such important issues to the community. We also, I don't know if you saw this, we didn't send it directly to members of council, but we filed a complaint because last time we were here, when we went up to the auditor's office to try to watch the induction or the swearing in of the new CRC members, a staff person from CRC, from IPR, shut the door in my face. The auditor, responding to our concerns, said that was a security issue and that it wasn't a public part of the office. And what we responded is, if we're supposed to enter through another door, they could have told us to enter through the other door instead of shutting the door in our face. So I'm hoping that there's more transparency in general in the future at IPR and CRC. Also, I meant to show you this. We have tracked every Citizen Review Committee member that's been on this board since it was created in late 2001. 66 different people have served on the committee. 35 have resigned. So there's a lot of turnover in this committee, and now it's a 3-year commitment, so I'm really hoping that we see people see their way through their whole terms. It used to be that people were appointed to fill the end of the other person's term, and now the person who gets appointed for the full 3 years. So there's a lot of staggering, which can be good for continuity, but it also can make a lot of confusion. CRC also used to be contained in quarterly and annual reports from IPR, and they're not. Portland Copwatch is now the only consistent coverage of this very important body. I just also want to mention that the woman that was shot by the Portland Police last week was the first woman shot by the Portland Police since 2003. Maybe we can think about moments of silence for the people who are victims of police shootings and for the people who are in the 7 countries where the U.S. is currently at war: Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, Libya, and Pakistan. Our parent group, Peace and Justice Works, sent you comments about the next item that you're going to hear about the warship being dedicated next month, and we are hoping that we'll spend money on human needs and not war.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Fritz?
Mr. Handelman, there's some debate about whether we're allowed to consider age in appointing our committees. I just wanted to bring that up to you, that there's concern about discrimination as well as affirmative action. So that's something to be aware of.
But the city code requires that it reflect the diversity of the city of Portland. And if there's nobody over the age of 57, that does not reflect the diversity of the city of Portland. So it's actually in violation of the code if they don't start appointing people.
I'm just saying there's some challenges in relation to federal and state law as well as the city code.
So Dan's put the challenge out. We're looking for people who are interested in serving on this body. We are an age-friendly city, so people of all ages, but he has called out what he believes to be a gap, and that's now out there. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Please call the roll.
Fritz.
Thank you very much for your willingness to serve. Thank you for being here and for the delay in getting you on stage. Thank you. Aye.
Udaley.
Thank you. Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The resolution is adopted. The appointment's approved. Thank you very much for your service. We're delighted to have you. Thank you. Next item, please, 242.
USS Portland Commissioning Committee on the USS Portland.
Colleagues, I would like to welcome Gary Piercy, the chair of the USS Portland Commissioning Committee, and Nolan Johnson, the public relations person for the USS Portland Commissioning Committee. Gary and Nolan are here today to show us a presentation on the USS Portland that will be commissioned in Portland, Oregon on April 21st. Portland is honored to have been selected to be a home for the USS Portland. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Gary and Nolan. And at the end, I am to read a proclamation. Good morning, sirs.
Morning. Thank you for allowing us to update the City Council on the commission of the USS Portland. We were here a couple years ago. I'm Gary Piercy, chairman of the commissioning committee, and this is Nolan Johnson, our publicity chairman and committee member. We've done a lot of things over the last couple of years. We wanted to update you on what's happening and what's going to happen. Actually, about 4 weeks from now, the ship will be arriving, 5 weeks. It'll be here a week, and then at the end of the week, we'll have the actual commissioning. I wanted to update you on what that's all about because you will all be receiving invitations to the activities, but I wanted to give you a little preview on what we're going to be doing. Nolan's going to start the presentation, then I'll join in later.
Okay.
Go ahead, Nolan.
All right, we'll go to the first slide. And as we're setting this up, the first slide really will walk us through the who, what, where, when, and why of the commissioning event. The USS Portland will be arriving in Portland April 14th and staying through the 22nd, with the official commissioning taking place on April 21st, Saturday. It will take place at Terminal 2 in the Port of Portland, and it will be an event at which we will have at least 5,000 attendees, including Navy officials and local and regional government dignitaries. It should be a grand event for the city of Portland. The USS Portland is the first Navy vessel named exclusively for our fair city, and so this makes for a very big deal for us. Now, this next slide shows a photo of the USS Portland, and I have to admit, I'm a boat guy. I grew up with boats, and there is something really fantastic about this photo. You can see that the wake behind the boat is curving out a pretty fancy S pattern. It may as well be a zoo bomber coming down from Skyline Boulevard on a Saturday night, or Germantown Road. There is a lot of action going on there. Now, let me put this ship in perspective for you. She's 684 feet long. If you stood her vertically in downtown Portland next to the Wells Fargo building, she would be 135 feet taller. She's large. She's pretty impressive. Now, besides what she can do in the water as a vessel, she has a very important mission. Her primary mission is to house, transport, deliver, supply, and retrieve Marines from any sort of area where that needs to happen. That's her primary military function. Now, she will have a 40-year life in service of the Navy, and in that role, most of her work will be done in a more humanitarian way. This schematic of the ship shows how she's built out. You'll see that she's got a flight deck on top with aircraft. She has what they call a well deck, which will flood, allowing boats to go in and out. And in the middle there, you'll see a fleet of trucks on board. That allows her to supply land-based supply and provisioning in a variety of roles. Gary, thanks. The Osprey. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Another shot of what the well deck would look like with water in it, allowing boats in and out. Next shot. Primarily, her role is going to be humanitarian. When it comes down to what she does over her 40 years, most of those missions will be search and rescue, first responder type stuff. In fact, during the hurricane season last fall, it was sister ships for the Portland that were stationed off of Houston and Miami right after the hurricanes. Hospital facilities on board for emergency care. And of course, the well deck can be used to dry for housing evacuees and creating a safe place, along with the ability to provide supplies in emergency situations and humanitarian causes.
Okay.
With that sort of a role for the USS Portland, I frankly, personally, can't imagine a more appropriate ship to be named after Portland, Oregon. The christening taking place on Saturday, the 21st of April. I'm sorry, I said christening, commissioning, taking place on the 21st of April, should be a very big event.
And the difference between those two things is that she's already been named. Now she's going to be put into service. Is that correct?
That is exactly right. Yes, at the christening, she was named. As a commissioning, she becomes, as soon as the commissioning is completed, she becomes battle ready, mission ready. She can be sent to respond to a situation at any time. So, commissioning activities. The committee has been very active prior to this for the past couple of years, as Gary mentioned. The week of the commissioning, from the 14th to the 21st, will include a lot of activities, tours, and a lot of social events, including recreational activities for the crew out amongst the city as well. It is an honor to have a ship from the U.S. Navy named after our city, especially a ship with this type of a role.
If we're lucky, we can get, let's see if we can click on it. There's supposed to be a video here. We'll see. If it may or may not open. It's not waiting longer. There's supposed to be a video here. It doesn't seem to be working, so we'll skip over it. Oh, did I, okay. Click it on the video. No, it's still not working. Okay, not gonna worry about it. The ship's motto is brave. First responders, brave and determined. This ship will have many occasions which she's called upon to assist in emergencies throughout the world. We can be proud and gratified when we hear the USS Portland has used her helicopters to transport doctors when bridges are down, or provide medical assistance for injured people in earthquakes, or even assisting third world countries with medical aid. She will be a ship at the scene of action. In the ship's crest, there are many icons that represent our city and history of previous ships with this name. The model is part of the crest along with the Rose representing the Rose City, as well as Portlandia's Trident. The gear on the anchor represents the city's shipbuilding construction during World War I and World War II. The 16 stars represent the 16 battles that the World War II USS Portland participated in. And the swords are swords from both the Navy and Marine officer and senior enlisted who will be aboard the ship. So what has the commissioning committee done over the last 3 or 4 years? Of course, the main event is the commissioning itself, Saturday morning, April 21st. We're now expecting over 6,000 invited guests. At one time, we said 5,000. We made a mistake, and we forgot the relatives of the crew. It's going to add another 1,200 or so. So they're going to have to hire a lot of chairs for people to sit in down there. It's going to be a very big audience.
Are any of those tickets available to the public?
I'm sorry?
Are any of those tickets available to the general public?
All of them are available. It's first comes, first serve. And unfortunately, because of the response, we had to cut it off about almost a month ago. Every day I get people, you can't believe the sad stories. We make a few exceptions once in a while, but it filled up very fast. The interesting part on that is that the ship will be here all week, and they will be holding public open houses sometimes. So we say if you really want to see the ship, that you'll be able to tour in the afternoons later, which is great.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, well, I mentioned that we're first come, first served basis. The event will also be attended by many senior Navy and Marine admirals and generals, as well as our federal, state, and local politicians. And of course, Mayor Wheeler will be representing the city on the platform during the commissioning. The night before the commissioning, we will be holding a dinner allowing various groups to honor the ship and crew with thanks and congratulations. We have scheduled a presentation of a gift from our city to the ship. This is a surprise, so no one is allowed to tell anyone from the ship what this will be. It turns out that Captain Hill was very interested in seeing and taking pictures of Portlandia when he was here last year. We've contacted Ray Katsky.
You aren't going to tell people, though, because then it's...
I'm sorry?
This proceeding is being publicized, broadcast. Shh. So it's a secret.
I think it's going to be an open secret.
Okay, well, do go on.
So we, no one from the Navy, no one from San Diego will hear this anyway. So
You're
we
really
have
surprised
contacted.
who watches this TV show. I am very surprised always.
Uh-oh. So we contacted Ray Katsky. He was a
Gary,
sculptor.
we're the #1 ranked television program in City Hall right now.
Okay, very quiet secret. Anyway, the sculpture was very, very generous, and he's allowed us to purchase his last small statue of Portlandia. It was number 500 of the series of 500. We really lucked out there. So it will be presented by whoever is going to be representative from the city to the ship on Friday evening, and it will be a permanent part of the ship in their wardroom. Then on Thursday evening, we will be providing an onboard dinner for the crew and their families. This will be accompanied by a Western band, and should be a lot of fun for them. The night before the ships arrive, she will stop in Astoria, and in conjunction with the Elks Club down there, we would be providing a welcome reception for the crew down there. Then after the ship arrives around 4 p.m. Here on Saturday, the next day, she'll be here for the whole week. During this time, we have planned various events around town for the crew and families. Many activities will be provided free. We've contacted the zoo and the Oregon Historical Society and OMSI and places like that, and they're offering free admission for the crew and their families. The Portland Spirit, for example, is offering free admission for many of the crew for both the sightseeing and then their Saturday night dances too. We are coordinating with various charity events for the crew to take part in, as well as in various interest groups that will be touring the ship. We expect the ship to have other opportunities for the public to tour also, as I mentioned. The commissioning committee has done this and more without any city funding or tax money at all, except the other day we did receive $1,000 to help pay for the gift, I understand. To put on the traditional receptions, dinners, and events, we have raised over $250,000 in cash and in-kind donations. This pays for such things as the actual wooden planks for all the crew, and they're called plank owners. This is a traditional gift the first crew on a new ship gets and hails from the old wooden ship days when the first crew got wood left over from the ship's construction and carved their names in it. This is one that would be presented to each of the crew. This is a partial list with over 100 donors, both companies and individuals. When we started out, we were looking for a sugar daddy or someone with a lot of money to hit us all at once and take care of our finances. Well, we never found this corporation around here for some reason or person. But the amazing part is we had, like I said, over 100 donors, a lot of small donations, and the companies have come through with donations too. So we've been very pleased that we're able to pay for all the traditional activities that normally happen and probably have some money left over to help the crew out with a welfare and recreational fund later. So how can the city welcome the ship? It may be appropriate to have some sort of formal event to welcome the crew and possibly read the city's proclamation at some point in time. I understand we may hear something later today on that. And since Captain Hill is very receptive to a long-term relationship with the city, he is inviting City Council and the staff to visit the ship while here in Portland. There's a great chance for you to meet not only him, but also the men and women serving in today's Navy. Other welcome activities include the port of, oh God, they don't charge your phone. Sorry. Shoot. Other welcome activities include Port of Portland displaying a beautiful model of the ship in the ticket lobby. They've done this for the last few months. And they'll be displaying a welcoming banner in the lobby, and they'll also be broadcasting on their neon signs welcoming for the sailors to the ship. TriMet is doubling the service on Route 16 down to the Terminal 2 area, and then they're going to run the buses later in the evening also. They've also arranged to have a billboard put up across the street from the terminal that says, "Welcome USS Portland." So there's a number of things going on. So the community is supporting this. We ask for your participation in various activities, from riding the ships from Astoria to dinners and receptions. These are all fun events, and getting to interact with both the sailors and the senior visiting VIPs is important for our city. And now is the time to make this Portland ship by telling all Portlanders this is a special occasion, and we're all proud of it. And let's make this a grand event, a grand commissioning. And thanks. I'm ready to answer any questions you may have.
Very good. Colleagues? Commissioner Daly.
Where will the ship be docked when it's not in
Terminal
service?
2, and as someone said, it's the best site they've ever seen for a commissioning of this ship because it's about 53 acres of open space. Unfortunately, it's the port property that isn't being used. There should be a lot of containers and things like that there, but this isn't being used. It's a great place to have the commissioning. The parking will be right next to the audience down there, so it's going to be a wonderful site for it. We'll have the commissioning itself. After the commissioning, there'll be tours of the ship, and there'll be a reception for most of the people that are attending. We'll be providing that. So it should be a fun day.
You know, we probably should also clarify that our home port will be San Diego, California.
That's what I was asking. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Very good. Any other questions? So is that the end of your presentation,
Yes.
Gary? Good. So it's my honor now to read a proclamation in honor of the USS Portland. Whereas the United States Navy is naming a new ship after an Oregon city exclusively for the first time. And whereas our city is proud and honored to have the Navy and our nation recognize Portland with such a ship. Whereas Portland was founded as a river port connected to the sea over 150 years ago and is still a major maritime port. Whereas Portland area shipyards and industry made significant contributions to winning both World War I and World War II with Navy ship construction, which contributed to population growth in the area. Whereas the USS Portland is a very versatile ship and will be used in both military and humanitarian roles to protect our nation's interests and to provide aid during emergencies such as earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, or other disasters. Whereas the new USS Portland LPD-27 is a force for peace and will carry our city's name throughout the world. Now, therefore, I, Ted Wheeler, Mayor of the City of Portland, Oregon, the City of Roses, do hereby proclaim April 21st, 2018 to be USS Portland Day in Portland and encourage all residents to observe this day.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. And I understand we have a number of members of the commissioning committee
Yes.
here as well. Why don't we do this? Why don't we give you the proclamation, and we could take a photo with the city council right
that'd be
here in
nice.
front. And if the other members of the commissioning committee would like to come up and participate in the photo, that'd be great. Y'all have to squish together.
Yeah, squeeze on in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Don't be shy.
Okay, just need, if you can maybe scoot in just a little bit more. Great.
Stand sideways. Stand sideways.
All right, look at the camera. All right, great. Thank you.
Great.
Thanks, Karen.
Thanks, John. Thank you.
Are we smiling?
Thank you.
Okay, but he says once again, sir.
Thanks for your hard work.
Oh, you're gonna get, thank you.
I'll look and see if there's any opportunities.
Carla, have any items been pulled from the consent agenda?
I have had no requests.
And is Commissioner Udaley in the chamber? Did I just lose Commissioner Udaley?
Mayor, can I report to you that I had the pleasure of joining the superintendent and some school board members at Roosevelt High School. And the student-organized event included speeches on the history and the law around the Second Amendment. And I asked if those speeches could be posted in some place where we could retweet them. And I actually, Senator Lou Frederick was standing next to me, misting up the entire time, and we both had the same observation, which is no wonder we win the national We the People competition so regularly. These students are so well-versed in civics, and they actually were making very powerful arguments about what a well-regulated militia actually means and why we got to get it right. So it was very inspiring.
That would have been interesting to see. I had the privilege of going to Lincoln High School, and the students there honored 17 minutes of silence, one for every individual who was killed in Parkland. And they had set up 17 school desks with the names of each of the victims. And then they put notes and photos in a container that they made on their own that they're going to actually send to the school in Parkland, which I thought was a great gesture. I've never seen so many kids, I mean, hundreds of kids, young adults, together on the field, and you could hear a pin drop. It was a very, very powerful and moving moment.
Yeah, also at St. Mary's, that students filed out complete silence. They tolled the bell and read after each tolling, read the name of each of the students and staff who died, and again went back in complete silence. And women have not always been silent, nor should we, but when these young women choose to be silent, it made a very powerful statement.
The young people of this city did us all proud today. Carla, please call the roll on the consent agenda.
Fritz.
Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The consent agenda is adopted. Next item is item number 243.
Ratify a letter of agreement between the city through the Bureau of Development Services and AFSCME Local 189 to increase the pay steps of several inspection classifications.
Commissioner Udaly.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, and I'd like to welcome our presenters on this subject. By way of background, my understanding is this came up as an issue after bargaining had taken place for the latest District Council of Trade Unions contract, and that contract was ratified. It became clear that some of the people at BDS, staff at BDS, were not going to receive wages that others in different classifications had received. There were several inspectors that didn't receive a raise, that staff in similar positions received. And I'm pleased to say that when the BDS leadership team realized what had happened, that it was management that pointed out the mistake to HR and AFSCME representatives. Director Rebecca Esau and her staff quickly tried to come to the table with a solution. And I just want to thank everyone for working together on this issue. We have Elshad Hajiv, the Senior Business Operations Manager for BDS, here to present with this item. And
Terrell Gaddis.
sorry, Terrell, I've seen you so many times, but
No problem.
didn't have it written down here. All right, welcome.
Thank you.
Elshad Hajiv, Senior Business Operations Manager for the Bureau of Development Services. Thank you, Commissioner Udaly, for introduction. Since that disparity was realized by the Bureau, we worked with BHR and with AFSCME to fix it. And this LOA is, create more equitable compensation for inspector classifications in Bureau of Development Services. To give you a little bit of a background, most of the inspector classifications in the Bureau of Development Services, the pay scales are at the parity, meaning, let's say, plumbing inspectors and electrical inspectors and building inspectors, the pay scales are basically the same. What happened during the labor contract negotiations is that combination inspectors, electrical and plumbing, that are represented by a different union, received 5% increase, and then the building inspector, site development inspector series, and housing inspector got only 3. So we've been working with BHR, working with the AFSCME to make sure that the compensations levels are the same and that parity continues in the future. The other reason why we're here is because we are trying to attract qualified candidates to our Bureau, and having that disparity actually prevents us from hiring qualified candidates. So this ordinance will provide equitable compensation for all of the inspector classifications at the Bureau of Development Services. If you have any questions.
Colleagues, any questions? Very good. Any public testimony on this item?
No one signed up.
Please call the roll.
Fritz.
Thank you for your work. Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Wheeler.
All right. The ordinance is adopted. Thank you for your work on this. Thank you, Commissioner Udaly. Item number 247, please.
Sorry, lost my item.
This is a second reading.
247, amend the Arts Education and Access Income Tax to end administrative cost limitation, place cost limitation under City Council oversight, and direct the Revenue Division to work with the Arts Education and Access Fund Citizen Oversight Committee to increase the poverty level exemption.
Very good. This has already been read. It has had a staff presentation. There has already been public testimony on this item. It is a second reading. Please call the roll.
Fritz?
Quick reminder that arts tax is due by April 15th, and it's now even easier to pay. You just go on Portland Online. It's linked from the front page. I did it over the weekend. It's really easy. Aye.
Fish?
I thought we had a good discussion last week. Two members of the public came and testified strongly in support of the action that has been proposed by the Revenue Bureau and approved by the Arts Oversight Committee. Mayor, the one thing that we sometimes omit in those conversations is we don't start by telling the good news. And the good news is, thanks to the generosity of Portland taxpayers, 30,000 kids in our public schools now have arts education as part of their basic curriculum. And many of us took it for granted when we were in middle school and high school. It was part of the basic curriculum. Today, that's not the case. Portland voters overwhelmingly said they were willing to tax themselves to make sure that our children got access to arts education. What we know is this is not a perfect tax, and there may be some additional tweaks that we need to consider to make it less regressive. But I think the proposal before us is reasonable, and I vote aye.
Udaley?
Well, I want to thank Commissioner Fish and staff for continuing to make sure the necessary adjustments and refinements that ensure a fair and appropriate collection structure for this fee. I also want to thank the Arts Oversight Committee, Revenue Bureau Director Thomas Lanham, and his team for doing the hard work of collecting this tax. Aye.
Wheeler?
I want to thank everybody who is engaged in the conversation and the folks who testified previously on this item. And I share Commissioner Fish's belief that this has been very positive in terms of the outcomes. I want to remind everybody that this was brought to City Hall a number of years ago by the public. The public, if they so choose, could pull it back, but in the meanwhile, it is our obligation to run it as best as we can. And I believe that the changes that are being made through this ordinance give us the opportunity to better manage this program and to be more accountable in the administration of this program. So I strongly support the work. I vote aye. The ordinance is adopted. Next item, 248.
Reappoint Claire Carter to the Portland Adjustment Committee for a term to expire March 4, 2022.
Commissioner Udaley.
Sorry, I've lost my, oh, I got one ahead of myself. Sorry about that. Okay. This is a reappointment. Claire Carter is the Vice Chair of the Development Review Advisory Committee, and she has served on the Adjustment Committee as well. At DRAC, which is short for Development Review Advisory Committee, just in case anyone's wondering, she's been part of the Neighborhood Coalition and Land Use Committees. She's knowledgeable about livability and environmental issues. She worked for ODOT for 32 years before retiring last year from her role as a wetland specialist who focused on water resource permitting. Claire is an avid marathon runner, and the reason she isn't here today as we vote to appoint her to the Adjustment Committee is because she is in California, where she ran a marathon at Catalina Island on Saturday. She tells staff at BDS that she is looking forward to another term on the committee and will make sure her running doesn't interfere with any meetings she needs to attend. Welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner Daly, Mayor Wheeler. So just quickly, the Adjustment Committee, it is a citizen volunteer committee made up of 7 citizens from the community. It probably is not the easiest of the committees to serve on in that they only hear appeals of land use decisions. So when they meet, they are faced with typically a competing, contrasting, conflicting opinions from whoever may be testifying. and they have to assess and evaluate what makes sense for that appeal, whether to approve, deny, or modify. Claire has been, this would be her second term, obviously. She has served since 2014. It's evident she brings her past nearly 40 years of experience working in basically in environmental planning to the committee, and importantly, bringing her public community service. She, as Commissioner Daly indicated, has served on the Maplewood Neighborhood Association Land Use Committee and serves on DRAC since 2013. So we look forward to having Claire back on the committee, and her term would be extended through 2022. So it's a 4-year term.
Very good. Colleagues, any further questions? I'll accept a
So
motion.
moved.
Second.
I have a motion from Commissioner Fish, a second from Commissioner Fritz. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Fritz.
I was responsible for recruiting Ms. Carter when I was in charge of the Bureau of Development Services. I very much appreciate her service in the community and in the city, and I'm happy to support this for a second and final term. Aye.
Fish.
We're certainly grateful to all of the residents of our city who step up to do public service, and I'm pleased to vote aye.
Udaley.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Fritz, for bringing Ms. Carter our way. I'm certainly pleased to recommend her reappointment to the committee, and thank her for her continued service. Aye.
Wheeler.
Great reappointment, and as per everybody else, I'm always appreciative when people of this caliber choose to volunteer their time. There's a lot of things they could be doing, and they're choosing to work with all of us to help to make the community a better place. So I appreciate it. I'm going to put out the same call that I put out last week, just as a reminder to folks. We are considering putting reappointments, not first-time appointments, but reappointments back onto the consent agenda. And again, we will take testimony, written emails, calls, whatever from people if they have strong feelings one way or the other. I'll tell you, in the last week, I've had approximately 0 responses to that request. So if people would like to chime in on that, please just send me an email at mayorwheeler@portlandoregon.gov. I vote aye. The appointment's approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item, 249, please.
Appoint Anjanae Brown, Lorena Nascimento, and Megan Van DeMark, and reappoint Greg Everhart, Brian French, Barbara Hollenbeck, and Damon Schrost to the Portland Urban Forestry Commission for terms to expire February 28, 2022.
Commissioner Fritz.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm very pleased to see the new perspectives that will be added to the commission with these 3 new appointees. Unfortunately, all of them had work obligations, so they weren't able to be here. And I certainly appreciate them volunteering their time on this very important commission. Jen Cairo, the city forester, is here to talk about the appointments.
Thank you, Commissioner Fritz. Good morning, Mayor and other commissioners. Again, I'm Jen Cairo, the City Forester and the Urban Forestry Division Manager. And what I'm bringing to you today is some potential appointments to our Urban Forestry Commission. So the Urban Forestry Commission is a resident advisory body to the City Forester, the Director of Parks, and the Commissioner in charge of Parks. And their duties pertain to policies around urban forest management, advising us on our forest budget, hearing appeals of certain types of permits and deciding those, and also nominating trees for the heritage tree list in the city. And the commission is intended to be broadly representative of the residents of Portland, so reflecting the people that we and they serve. And I'm happy to say that we will have, after today, if these folks are appointed, all seats filled, and we will have the most broadly representative forestry commission that we've had in 6 years. So first off, you have photographs and write-ups before you, by the way. Anjanette Brown, this is one of the 3 new appointees. is an outreach specialist for Oregon tradeswomen and an Oregon tradeswoman graduate herself. She has served on the leadership committee for 3 years in that organization and received an award for extensive volunteer work. She was also an instructor for the Oregon tradeswomen girls and young women programs. Her statement is that she recently completed a volunteer position with the Community Advisory Committee on Portland Parks and Recreation Urban Forestry's citywide tree planting strategy. That's how we got to know Anjanette, and she really found out about the Forestry Commission. And she found a deep connection there with her community in terms of trees and with other local tree enthusiasts, and she's looking forward to serving on the Forestry Commission with us. Lorena, the second of the new appointees, is a Brazilian forester, and she's currently a PhD student at PSU in their urban studies program. She's worked with environmental education, community gardens, geographic information systems, and sustainable development. In Brazil, she's worked with indigenous communities, extension projects, and research with renewable materials. Here in Portland, she is a teaching assistant for environmental classes at PSU and an instructor in the Portland Parks and Rec Sun Schools program. She's interested in being on the commission to further her understanding of metropolitan urban forestry policies, and also as a PhD candidate at PSU, she's looking for further forest management knowledge that she can take back to Brazil with her when she eventually goes. So the third of the new appointees is Megan Vandemark. Megan is an employee of Friends of Trees. She's a neighborhood tree specialist with them serving in Vancouver over the river and in Clark County. And she contracts part of her time to the City of Vancouver Urban Forestry and has previously worked with us in Portland Urban Forestry on our street tree inventory project. She has a master's in sustainable development, a BA in journalism and women's studies, and she's interested in serving in the Forestry Commission because she's passionate about trees and the community, and she's very interested, since she lives in Portland, in serving her local community in terms of trees, as opposed to her work, which is, of course, in Washington State.
And I believe she lives in North Portland, which is an area that we didn't previously have any commissioners serving from.
Yes, and I'll point out also that Anjanette is almost from Gresham. She's from far eastern Portland, and that's an area also where we've really been looking to get some representation on the commission to bring those perspectives. So those are the three new appointees, and now I'll move to those who are being reappointed. So first of those, Greg Everhart. Greg is a landscape architect with 25 years of experience in that field, including 15 years working at Portland Parks and Recreation. She's long since retired from that. She volunteers as a master gardener and neighborhood tree steward, as well as helping with the street tree inventory and with Friends of Trees planting. She also has a leadership role in the American Society of Landscape Architects. Greg has also been very active and interested in implementation of the city's tree regulations and currently serves as the chair of the city's Heritage Tree Committee. You all have heard from Greg at least on a few occasions when she was proposing new trees to be added to the Heritage Tree list. Moving on, Brian French is also currently a commissioner, and we're looking to see him reappointed. He is a certified arborist who practices locally. He has a broad range of related certifications and specialties, especially regarding large trees and hazard tree risk assessment. He's been practicing for over 18 years, locally and abroad. He often is helping out in Hong Kong and in areas of Asia because of his special expertise. He's also the principal at Arboriculture International and co-founder and president of the nonprofit Ascending the Giants. He volunteers with Friends of Trees, Hoyt Arboretum, and also helps coordinate the annual Pacific Northwest tree climbing competition. Brian currently serves on the appeals board of the Forestry Commission and brings great expertise given his commercial and nonprofit background to the commission's work. Next up is Barbara Hollenbeck. Barbara Hollenbeck retired from the Forest Service, where she managed the assistance provided by states by their urban and community forestry program for the Northwest, including Alaska. In addition, Barbara has worked with universities, colleges, nonprofits, and managed financial assistance grants and provided educational information about community tree stewardship in those states. Prior to her 20 years in that position, she also had some technical and management positions regarding on-the-ground tree and trail management. Barbara is currently the chair of our appeals board, and she's looking forward to continuing in that role and has provided excellent service to the commission. We're looking forward to having her, like Brian and Greg, continue on. So last but not least, Damon Schrosk is another potential reappointee to the commission. Damon Schrosk is the owner of Treecology, which is a local commercial tree care company. He brings years of commercial arboricultural experience and has supported tree care and stewardship activities as a volunteer for many years in many ways. Damon is a winner of the Bill Nato Community Awards, which we give each spring at Arbor Day. His was in 2013. And if you recall the big tree hug event that we had at the Hoyt Arboretum a few years ago, Damon was the driving force behind that. Damon currently serves on the appeals board of the Forestry Commission. He looks forward to continuing in that role, and he also helps out with the Education, Outreach, and Heritage Tree Committees. That completes my presentation of the new and reappointees for your consideration. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Colleagues, any questions?
Just a comment. Thank you for the report you gave us. I love the fact that there's not only a bio, but a photograph. And that you've given us all that information that's in the record. And so I really appreciate that you went that extra mile.
Thank you, Commissioner Fish.
Very good. I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion from Commissioner Fish, a second from Commissioner Udaly. Any further questions or comments?
Just my only question, we'll follow Commissioner Fritz's lead, but this is an extraordinarily diverse and accomplished group of people, and I'm assuming it has the blessing of the commissioner in charge, the entire cohort.
Was personally overseeing the selection process, so yes, sir. Thank you.
Please call the roll.
Fritz.
Could you just, I'm completely blanking, the name of the commission chair who is retiring, the woman who was with Audubon, starts with an M.
Oh, yes, okay. Meryl Reddish, who was the executive director of Audubon for about 10 years. Her final term with the Forestry Commission expired in February, so she stepped down from the commission.
So I just wanted to acknowledge that, and I've met with her on a monthly basis since I've become Parks Commissioner, so that is unfortunate. Thanks to Meryl Reddish, also to Mark Bellow, who also chaired the commission. So people are stepping off and coming on as is intended by our policy of term limits, and I'm very excited about this latest group of folks who will engage with us as we have the difficult task of looking at the tree code, what needs to be fixed in it, what we can do in the interim and before we fix it, and just a whole host of different advisory capacities that the Urban Forestry Commission serves. Aye.
Fish.
Well, we should be grateful that such a accomplished group of people are willing to step up and provide service. And the annual presentation on heritage trees is one of the highlights of our calendar. So thank you for your good work. Thank you, Commissioner Fritz. Aye.
Udaly.
Well, I'm crossing my fingers for another citywide tree hugging event because I feel like I really missed out and I would like to participate in that. Aye.
Wheeler.
Great panel, and I agree, Commissioner Fritz. Thank you for the presentation, the way it was laid out. I think it's excellent and helpful to the public as well. I vote aye. The report's accepted. The appointments are approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Council.
Next item, please. Item number 250, resolution.
Approve and terminate limited tax exemptions for properties under the Home Buyer Opportunity Limited Tax Exemption Program.
Colleagues, the Portland Housing Bureau administers the city's tax exemption programs, as you're aware. The Home Buyer Opportunities Limited Tax Exemption Program, known as the HOLTE program, provides a 10-year tax exemption for low to moderate income home buyers, making home ownership more obtainable for families in Portland. Home builders apply for the tax exemption prior to starting construction of their new homes. The Housing Bureau approves builder applications through filing a resolution with the council several times a year. 54 properties are being approved for the program through this resolution. Homes with exemptions must sell below the annual sales price cap to income-qualified home buyers planning to be owner-occupiers of the home. Provided these conditions are met, the exemption continues for as long as the 10-year term. When developers sell a home over the price limit or to a buyer who does not qualify, or when a home is not owner-occupied, the exemption is removed. Before an exemption is terminated, owners have the opportunity to appeal the decision made by the city. Within this resolution, 19 properties tax exemptions are being removed. Today, we have the Portland Housing Bureau's Development Incentives Program Manager, Dory Van Bakel, here to answer questions. We obviously have Shannon Callahan, the Housing Bureau Interim Director, here as well. But first, I'd like to offer an amendment to add Trang Thai's property to Exhibit A's approval list. This property was inadvertently left off of the original Exhibit A.
Second.
So let me read the full motion as was scribed out by legal counsel. The total number of exemptions needs to be updated from 53 to 54, and the estimated foregone revenue from $106,954 to $108,972. The list needs to be updated to add number 54 with a record number of 5592-17. The property owner's name is Trang Thai. The tax account number is R563350, and the property address is 8935 Southeast Harney Court, zip code 97266. The exemption type is A37. We have a motion from the mayor, a second from Commissioner Fish. We will leave that open for the presentation and for any public testimony, and then we'll come back to take a vote on the amendment as well as the resolution. So we'll start with Shannon. Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor. Good morning, Commissioner. Shannon Callahan, the Portland Housing Bureau. As the mayor mentioned, this is an important tool to incenting homeownership in the private market. We come to you approximately 3 times a year to list new homes eligible for the exemption and remove homes that are ineligible for the exemption. I am joined by Dory Van Bakel, our Development Incentives Team Manager, who's here to answer any specific questions you may have.
I have 2 questions.
Commissioner Fish.
One is, did you receive any objections from any of the property owners whose tax abatement is being terminated?
We did not have any request an appeal, no.
Okay. And number 2, could you remind me of the history of this? Was this program previously administered by the Portland Development Commission?
Yes, it was.
So for the benefit of 2 colleagues that are relatively new, these tax abatement programs once upon a time were administered by the Portland Development Commission. There was a certain amount of controversy in the community about the level of oversight and transparency. When we created the Portland Housing Bureau, those responsibilities came to the Housing Bureau, which now has dedicated people that review these things. And I can remember many, many years ago, Shannon, you can too, when you'd have a room filled with people that wanted to testify on this or had issues. And I think it's a reflection on how well this is being administered by the Bureau and how transparent the process is, that this has now become a routine matter on our calendar. And I want to just compliment staff for the work you're doing to administer this program.
Thank you very much. Both Sharon Johnson and Marilyn Hurtley do great work on the team, so thank you.
Very good. Any further comments or questions? Any testimony on this item?
No one signed up.
Very good. With regard to the amendment, please call the roll.
Fritz.
Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The amendment's adopted. To the main resolution, please call the roll.
Fritz.
First resolution, sorry. Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Thanks to the Housing Bureau for your great work on this. I vote aye. The resolution is adopted as amended. Next item, number 251.
Approve interim use of the multiple unit limited tax exemption program to capture opportunities for affordable housing in housing developments not subject to inclusionary housing and amend administrative rules.
Colleagues, today we're taking up a plan that addresses the projects that were in the pipeline before the inclusionary housing program was enacted. We have an affordability crisis here in the city of Portland. We have declared a housing emergency, And that's why the city of Portland enacted inclusionary housing requirements in the first place. Today, we're taking up this program for the projects that are not required to build affordable housing. And I want to make sure that we can capture as many affordable units from that pipeline as possible. This is about getting more affordability, getting as much affordability as we can for Portlanders. I supported the creation of the inclusionary housing program. I'm tracking it closely, and I want to make sure that it is an effective tool as we move forward. However, there are many projects that entered the development pipeline prior to inclusionary housing. The projects total approximately 19,000 units of housing, and none of them are subject to inclusionary housing. My administration has struggled with this question. How do we get more affordable units into the projects that are already in the pipeline and not subject to inclusionary housing? And most importantly, how do we get those units right now instead of years from now? This is not an academic question. We're in a housing crisis, and the need exists now, and the public expects us to act now. The multiple unit limited tax exemption, or multi, is a proven tool that we can use to reach back into the pipeline of housing projects. Projects that are moving through the system as we speak, projects that are going to be built, and make sure that some of those units become affordable units. Not doing anything means that all of the units will be brought onto the market at prevailing market rate. Not doing anything means we lose an opportunity to ensure that we're taking the housing crisis seriously. With the ordinance before you, I propose we use multi to incentivize those building housing in Portland to include affordable housing in those projects. The program includes sensible safeguards. For example, these incentives will only be available for 2 years. Also, the total amount of incentives over the life of the program cannot exceed an amount valued at $3 million, above $3 million. Third, and I offer the following amendment: only pre-inclusionary housing developments with an estimated first year of foregone revenues of $500,000 or less will be approved. Only vested projects with an estimated first year of foregone revenue of $500,000 or less are eligible for an exemption. Do I have a second on that motion?
Second.
Do you have it in writing, Mayor?
We can get you that information in writing momentarily.
So Mayor,
Commissioner Fish.
I have an additional amendment that I've reviewed with your office and obtained your concurrence, which is to remove the emergency clause.
Could I hold off on that for 1 second, but I'll remember it's there. With this amendment that we have just moved and seconded by Commissioner Fish, for the record, we can ensure the program is available to multiple projects and that no one project will take a majority of the total value of the incentives. Our housing staff is going to be providing more detailed information on this strategy as part of their presentation, and they'll touch on why we think the $500,000 cap is the right amount for the cap. Commissioner Fish has moved that we remove the emergency clause to the ordinance. There's a second from Commissioner Fritz. So we now have 2 amendments on the table, and at this point I'll turn this over to Interim Director Callahan and Matt Scheibold and the Portland Housing Bureau, who are here to present. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Mayor. Good morning, Commissioners. Shannon Callahan from the Portland Housing Bureau. As the Mayor mentioned, the inclusionary housing went into effect approximately 1 year ago. We saw 19,000 units coming into the pre-IZ pipeline. That represents 42% of all multifamily development that we've seen in the last 20 years. So it is a significant number of units. As of February of 2018, we still have approximately 10,000 in the permit process.
Madam Director?
Yes.
You know, for people that are not housing insiders, would you just briefly explain what it means to be vested?
So, Commissioner, that means that you met the legal requirements before the date that the inclusionary housing was effective, which was February 1st of 2017. That can be met in a variety of different ways, either with a permit, a application for land use action, or a permit application.
And just to put it in context, because 19,000 units seems like a big number.
Yes.
I think I've heard in a prior hearing that that is the equivalent of at least 3 years of development activity or more.
That would be the equivalent of 3 of our highest years that we've ever seen in the city of Portland. So it's not an equivalent that would be average to what we would typically see over a period of time, but in our biggest of biggest booms, that is more than 3 times what we would have seen.
Thank you.
So we worked on this proposal at the direction of Mayor Wheeler and our Portland Housing Advisory Commission. Our commission was very interested in finding solutions to incent the pipeline as well. This proposal was brought before that group at the beginning of this year, which they unanimously endorsed bringing to this council. Thank you. So as the mayor mentioned, we have before you a slightly modified version of the previous voluntary multi-program, which was a successful program in place for a number of years. As the mayor mentioned, it does have sideboards on the proposal, including time limitations, cost limitations, and now the eligibility of the project size itself. I would like to note that this is all within the agreed upon cap that we have with Multnomah County. There would be no additional fiscal impact to any other taxing jurisdiction beyond what we've already previously agreed. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dory Van Bockel, who is the Development Incentives Team Manager, to talk about some details of the program, and then Matthew Shabold will review our analysis of the costs and the benefits of providing this tax exemption.
Sure. So to provide a quick summary of what the program makes available to developers to use, and showing how it's similar to the prior multi-program before inclusionary housing went into effect, as the multi is a tool as one of the incentives provided through inclusionary housing. So
clarify, do we still have that? We still have that program?
We have that program as a paired tool with the inclusionary housing program. And so this makes some interim use of the same code of the multi with a little bit of changes from how it's used through inclusionary housing.
And that program has a rolling 15 million over 5 years or 3 million. Is this an additional 3 million?
No, this would be encompassed within that existing cap with its own limitation on how many units could be approved through this use within that larger cap.
And what has been our utilization under the existing program?
So the existing program now is through the inclusionary housing. You know, previously we have some information that Matt will go through over the last few years, though, that shows the utilization of the multi that is similar to what we would be enacting through this ordinance.
Dory, just to follow up on that, because you have this wonderful chart, it says the exemption time frame is 10 years. I seem to recall that from time to time the council has extended the 10-year period, but I think it's been a discretionary act. Is that correct? It's not part of the program?
Yes. Previously, if there were projects with continued affordability, we had on occasion extended the exemption for just those affordable units.
And we have that the council retains that
It's
authority.
not within the current code for the multi-program because it didn't fit very well within the inclusionary housing calibration that we performed to enact that program.
So it would have to be, the council would, in the next couple of years, would have to affirmatively include that option in any code rewrite?
Potentially, but the state statute limits us to a 10-year duration, so they would have to reapply. A development would have to reapply to the city. So we would not only need enacted code language, but we'd need them to reapply, and usually we'd have them do that closer to the time of the expiration.
And one of the reasons this has come up in the past is that because of the significant need for housing at the 60% level, is the prospect of a renewal, does it make it more attractive for someone to choose that to begin with? And I don't know the answer to that question.
I would imagine that folks, that there would be some indication that would be enticing, but Right now, the state statute is set to sunset, so we could not commit until that statute was
The
reauthorized.
reauthorization by the legislature and whatever policy making we do.
Exactly.
Thank you.
So to just give that quick summary then, so of the 10 years exemption timeframe, the affordability period is the same at 10 years as well. And differing a little bit from how the program was before, we've set the income level for the restricted units at 20%, at 60% of area median income for projects designed and built to be less than 5-to-1 FAR, and then at 20% at 80% of area median income for any projects designed and built over 5-to-1 FAR. And the reason for the difference is the type of building and the construction cost to build a project over 5-to-1 FAR generally results in much higher market rents and overall cost of construction, making the feasibility of those projects with the different rent types only makes sense at those two different levels.
And since we're inventing this program, we don't have to mirror the inclusionary housing.
So that same type of that we looked at through inclusionary housing, where there's different income percentage levels around the city, but the 5-to-1 FAR bar is one that's used through the calibration of the inclusionary housing program as well. In the prior program, we used it based on market rents in the building, but this is a much more subjective or objective way of reviewing the projects without having the manipulation potentially of what's submitted as the market rents.
Okay, so FAR is floor area ratio, and it's roughly translates to the number of stories or different floors, right? So in our inclusionary housing rules, it was 20% at 60%?
No, it's actually, so inside the Central City and Gateway Plan districts, for buildings that are 5-to-1 FAR or above, the restriction levels are either 20% at 80 or 10% at 60 with a full tax exemption. And then outside of the Central City and Gateway Plan districts, or for any buildings anywhere below 5-to-1 FAR, the requirements are only, or it's only provided with a multi or a tax exemption on the affordable units.
At 20% of 60?
Or it'd be 10% at 60.
So I guess that's why I'm questioning, or maybe you'll get to this later too. Why is it 20% and not 10%?
So there's a full tax exemption in this case rather than just a partial tax exemption.
Meaning all of the units, not just the affordable ones?
Yes.
Wow.
So can I jump in on this conversation? Because I have to say that despite everyone's best efforts, there has been a little bit of confusion in the conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think today we get a chance to really put this on the table and be very clear. I actually applaud your decision to make it 20% at 20% of the units at 60% of MFI citywide. That's an improvement over what we agreed to through the IZ rules. The question about whether the exemption should apply to all the units or just the abated units is something council, has to consider because that's part of the proposal. But to me, this is a very big selling point that you've made it citywide and you bumped it to 20%. Because I had a concern coming into this that we would be once again incentivizing 80% housing, which is housing we need, but is not as compelling to me as 60 and below. So this is a change that I think, from my point of view, makes this a stronger proposal.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And to also clarify some of the other public benefits that are available or would be part of approval of any projects coming through the multi-program under this interim use. Developers are required to obtain an MWSB, Minority Women and Emerging Small Business Consultant, in order to work with their construction contractor in order to strive towards the city's 20% participation in construction contracting.
But that's still not a hard standard, it's still a goal.
Pardon me?
That's not a hard standard still, it's still a goal.
It is still a goal, yes. And so this would be taking real world people with experience, with the contacts in the community, of MWSB contractors in helping facilitate the opportunities for them in these projects. Additionally, as is required in the current version of the multi, we will continue the requirement that at least 5% of the affordable units are built to be fully ADA adaptable.
Dory and the director, at some point in the future, could you come back to us with options for how we could make fully ADA adaptable or accessible units part of our basic code and not something that is included every time we add a caret? You know, we have seen over time that, for example, eco roofs went from being a niche thing and a thing that you could get a bonus for to now being a mandate.
Right.
And that reflects a change in thinking, you know, over time. I think at some point it would be useful for us to come back to this question and say, what are some basic standards we want to bake into all of our investments around accessibility, particularly since we know that our community is going to be graying, we're going to get older. And so what should be the standard as opposed to what we can incentivize through these kinds of programs?
What is the current standard under the Americans with Disabilities Act?
Do you know that, Matt?
I would need to check on that, Commissioner. I think Portland uses 2% and 3% for type A or type B, but I'd need to check. And I see Commissioner Daly.
That sounds about right. I mean, I'm also interested in this issue. I'm curious how 5% was arrived at and if we actually know what current demands are for accessible housing and if we're looking into the future, because as Commissioner Fish has mentioned, we do have an aging population and this is going to become a greater need in decades to come. And I've been kind of ruminating lately about how, you know, our job is to plan for the future. And I think when most of us think about the future, we think about our children and our grandchildren, not people who are currently or soon to be elders and experiencing mobility challenges. So that's something I'd like to see us address.
Commissioner, just to be clear, you know, we're all learning every day about things. It's, for example, through the experience of you and your son that I've learned some very powerful things about inaccessible restrooms and changing areas. And so we have tried to take those lessons and apply them to the rebuild in the Portland building. My guess is the ADA sets a standard. The question is, can we go above it? And while I think there's different ways you could get there, I think about basic things like, are all the doorways fully accessible? Because I can tell you, having looked at a lot of rental apartments in the city, there's a lot of places where you just couldn't get a wheelchair through. Are the bathrooms designed to be accessible? And I don't necessarily mean everything in the bathtub for someone that, you know, maybe is fully disabled, but can you get into the restroom? Can you get in with a wheelchair? Are there basic things? I think the council would benefit from knowing what are the standards out there, and then over time, are there ways we could strengthen our code so that all units come with a higher level of accessibility rather than using these opportunities to carve out units?
And I do think arriving at that number is a little more nuanced than looking at demand and, you know, the gap between what we have and the existing demand, because people with disabilities are more likely to be low income. So it may be that we need to bump that percentage up as far as when it comes to affordable units, because we're going to have a greater percentage of people needing accessible units than in the average population.
So the one piece I would add, I think Dory can speak to the structure and wanting to ensure that some of the affordable units sourced through the multi are also the adaptable units in the building. So it wasn't just the non-adaptable units, but on assessing the market, you know, we're in a fortunate place with respect to a better understanding of the housing stock, because Portland was one of the cities that the Census Bureau selected for the American Housing Survey in 2017, and so we're still waiting for the final results, and we can come back, but it's a much deeper survey of the housing stock that exists across the city than comes through the American Community Survey that's done every single year. The American Housing Survey is not done every year in Portland. And so a lot of the questions you're asking about our existing rental stock will be very much informed by this new data set that should be available soon, and we can do these kinds of analyses and a lot of other kinds of analyses
That's
as well.
exciting.
Are you done with that presentation?
Oh, no, there's a few more slides.
Commissioner Daly.
I do have one more question. So, you know, when looking at our inclusionary housing program and looking at this multi-program, I'm really interested in, are we offering an incentive that's roughly equivalent to what the property owner is giving up in rents? And when I hear tax abatement on an entire building and not just the affordable units, I do have to wonder if they're getting an extraordinarily high return. And that may not be the case, but because I've never been provided with those numbers or, you know, even a hypothetical, it's hard for me to know. What I do know is they're telling us that IZ doesn't pencil out. They're having challenges with lenders with no additional incentives, although I find that hard to believe within the central city when they're getting the tax break on the entire building. Any?
So the inclusionary zoning program does have another additional incentives and benefits that this program doesn't have.
Yeah.
And so I would love to have a dialogue with you about how the inclusionary program was set up precisely. But we did do an analysis for your benefit to know what exactly this program is giving a developer based on our project experience versus the rent decreases that the developer would be giving us for the same period of time. So you were actually we're just going to talk about that. So you have a good sense.
We're jumping.
Sorry.
Jumping the.
No. We're in line with your questions, which is good. So now I'm going to turn it over to Matt to talk with you a little bit about the experience of what we've looked at from 30 projects that we had in our last multiple unit tax exemption report, which was we reported on in 15-16. And so we did some analysis so you can see a little bit about what this means for a project. And we did do this based on the mayor's amendment this morning to cap the individual project size at 500,000. So, Matt.
Right, so we looked at, and it's not, the projects aren't from all of them aren't from last fiscal year. They were approved in multiple years, but there were 30 projects in the report that were highlighted, and we filtered out 8 of them because they wouldn't be relevant to the program proposal to try and give some comparison estimates. 4 were for buildings that had a first-year tax exemption of over $500,000, and 4 were partially affordable housing projects that had some market rate residential, so it wouldn't have been a good comparison.
Why isn't that isn't that what you're proposing here?
Because it wouldn't reflect the amount of, essentially the cost of the affordable unit, because there's more than 20% of the units in the building affordable.
So I think
it would imply a lower kind of cost per affordable unit. We wanted to give some real estimates for private market rate developers that were building buildings with 20% of the units affordable.
So Commissioner, when a nonprofit provider has a regulatory agreement with the City of Portland, they're eligible for a different type of tax exemption through the Oregon revised statutes. However, when we create that same 60-year affordability period for our regulated housing with a for-profit, they are not eligible for that tax exemption. So they would have to come in under this limited tax exemption. And so that's what Matt has pulled out is, projects that would have a larger number of affordable units in them, likely to be a for-profit developer who is developing affordable housing. I know that's...
I'll keep going. I know that Commissioner Fisher's moved to take the emergency off, so maybe this is information I can get before the next session.
Absolutely. So in the 22 projects, there were a total of 2,060 units, market rate and affordable. Of the 2,060, there were 430 affordable units, 293 at 80% of the area median income, and 137 at 60%. And when you run through the analysis, what you get is that on average, in year one property tax exemption, that the cost to the city and the county and the school districts and all the taxing jurisdictions was $10,000. It's about an average of about $10,000 of tax exemption per affordable unit per year. So when you look at that over a 12-month period of time, that's roughly $833 of tax exemption per month. And then when you move to looking at, well, how does that translate into the discount on rent that renters are getting in those units? Looking at the average for Central City and the average for Portland, for new construction apartment units, it's about $2,000 a month in the Central City and about $1,700 a month citywide.
What size is this? 2 bedrooms?
This is just a straight average.
Oh, just average. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. And so in the Central City, where you're more likely to see 5-to-1 construction or above, and thus somebody subject to the 20% of units at 80% of the median income, the affordable rent level is $1,100, and it varies based on household size, which would be about a $900 rent discount per month, which is, going back a slide, roughly comparable to the amount of tax exemption, slightly more than the amount of tax exemption that the jurisdictions are providing each month. And for the city overall, so outside the Central City included, where you would likely see buildings that are being developed at less than 5-to-1 FAR, so they would only be eligible for the 20% of units at 60% of the median income, you would see a discount of about, the regulated rent is $840 a month. And so you'd see a discount of about $860. Again, fairly equivalent to the amount of tax exemption being given away each month. So.
And I think the tax exemption is actually slightly more desirable because you get it whether, you only get rent if your unit is occupied, but you get that exemption.
That's correct.
No matter what. Okay,
That's correct.
that does answer my question. Thank you.
But Matthew, what these numbers, maybe I'm just being thick, which I'm experiencing a lot these days. Do these numbers account for whether the abatement covers the entire building or just the abated units?
So the abatement would cover all residential in the building, yes. So the calculations are based on the assumption that the tax exemption is applied to the affordable rental units as well as the market rate rental units.
Oh. And so these numbers then are a blended number that takes into account that the entire tax bill is being waived?
This is based on historic performance, which in the past, prior to inclusionary zoning, the tax exemption was on the entire building. So we're comparing.
So what you've done is taken, I'm sorry to have to reduce it to this, but it's probably my level. So let's say the entire building under the program, the owner saves $10,000 in property taxes. I know that's let's say $100,000.
Right.
But in terms of calculating the public benefit, you've then attributed the total tax abatement to the abated units, and that's the number that you've given us.
We've taken that to the affordable units, yes.
So could I jump in here? It's basically a transfer of foregone taxes to low-income renters. And it has to be an approximately equal transaction with maybe a slight benefit, as is the case here, to the landlord. Otherwise, they won't participate. It's a completely voluntary program, and there's no requirement that they do this. So for them, they're going to run a spreadsheet and decide whether or not this hurts them. On balance, it doesn't help them nor hurt them, but it absolutely helps those who are the people who are lower income in the units. So the question for us really is the trade-off of foregone revenues going to low-income renters or coming back instead at more full market value into the city's general fund. And as we are in a housing emergency, it was my calculation that this is priority number one.
Can I ask a follow-up question, Shannon? So now I think I understand apples to apples here. I guess the other question that's relevant, I think, and I've heard from some people, and I just want to make sure I understand this, we're making a bet that offering this inducement will encourage someone to participate because it's voluntary. So
Yes.
we're making a bet based on feedback we've heard from those developers who beat the IZ deadline, are vested, but have said if we had a program like this, they might take advantage of it, correct?
Yes, and I'm sure you'll hear from developers. We did talk with some developers who had asked for an increased incentive package, but we also felt because this package is so similar to what we had on a voluntary basis before that was working, that that we were on the right path with this proposal.
And so what would you say to someone who says, love the concept, love what you're trying to do to create some IZ, bring people into the, to create some affordable housing with units that are beat the deadline, but aren't quite sure whether the abatement should cover all the units or just the affordable units? What's from your point of view the most compelling argument to make it apply to all the units and not just the affordable units?
Well, I think it's the math that you see before you about what the value of the abatement is and what the rent discount is. And if because the abatement value and the rent discount are so closely aligned, as the mayor said, and there's a little bit more of a benefit to the developer. If we skew in a way that there's no benefit to the developer on a voluntary program, we will not get anyone accepting the
And if I
program.
could add to that, and then the reason for the $500,000 cap per project is so that we aren't subsidizing, let's just call it out, we're not subsidizing any one developer we're not overly subsidizing any one developer. This keeps it limited.
Well, except that if we've got 10,000 or more units, if we're only going to allow 6,000 of them, no, 3,000 of them to have this benefit.
So it might be helpful also for you guys to discuss where the $3 million comes from, because this is a subset of a program that's already been adopted. And so maybe it's useful to maybe digress here for a moment.
Sure. We were trying to create a little bit of a, come in now, give us your proposal. Time is valuable to us. These are, if these projects are ready to construct very quickly and we can get new units affordable very quickly, and that was something that was appealing. So we did want to put a value limited cap and also make sure we had room for inclusionary zoning. If for some reason you felt like this program was working and wanted to extend that cap within the foregone revenue cap, it's something you could do, but we were trying to encourage folks to step forward with real life proposals sooner than later. And so that's the other reason we time valued the proposal to only 2 years. We don't want these permits to be sitting out for such a long period of time. If people really are ready to develop, let's try to capture those now.
But what do
while we're in
we,
a crisis.
so the other question, Shannon, someone might ask is, we bumped the cap for foregone revenue in negotiations with the county from 1 million to 3 million. And the assumption here is that we're leaving money on the table, that we're not meeting the full 3 million of foregone revenue that we've agreed to. So is that true, or does this compete with some other program?
Right now, because the pipeline is so vast, we're not seeing a lot of new developments coming in under inclusionary. We went to a rolling cap, so went from a 3-year to a rolling of 15 over 5 years to be able to address development cycles. We felt like this 3 million was an adequate amount to reserve for the pre-pipeline and make sure that we still had enough available for
To be clear, this is a
projects under
carve-out,
inclusionary.
3 of the 15,
This
correct?
is a carve-out of that, yes. It is
It's
not, it is not
taking
new.
resources from another source.
It is not.
Right.
There's no increase in foregone revenue.
And if we adopt this, does the county have to adopt it as well?
Yes.
Okay, and that's been that's the historical practice. We have to do them concurrently.
Within a reasonable time of each other, yes.
And what does the county think about this?
We've been having ongoing dialogues with the county for some time, and I believe the mayor has had the most recent conversations with the county.
Well, and let me address that question for a moment, because the county is a sovereign body, and they have every right to take this up, and it is conceivable, and it's happened in the past, that they may have a view of this that is aligned with us or is not aligned, in which case they may have suggestions for improvements. And that actually sometimes results in a better piece of legislation. So that's the process we have to go through anyway. What we're essentially, the mayor has put down a marker and said, let's capture this opportunity. Here's a way we can do it. It fits within the $3 million cap. And what you're tweaking, the two tweaks that I actually really appreciate is the $500,000 cap and expanding the number of units to 20% at 60%. Because again, I think that's where there's a more pressing need than at 80%. We need housing at every level. Sure. But in terms of what you've documented as the need. So I just want to signal something to my colleagues. I want to hear the testimony, but I may withdraw my motion on the emergency clause. There are things I'm learning in this hearing that are very helpful to my decision, and I had talked to the mayor about having an additional week just to make sure I didn't miss anything. But I think you're doing a very good job explaining this proposal.
Thank you. I'd prefer another week just to, this is the first time I've had a lot of this information. And so I'd also like to know from the mayor, since Director Callahan said you've most recently talked to the county, what does the county think about this?
So as Commissioner Fish mentioned, they are a sovereign body, and they have two options if we pass this. They can reject it outright, or alternatively, they could amend it, in which case I presume it comes back to us for reconsideration. I'm not sure on that, Robert. Maybe you could, as legal counsel, give us some insight into that. I won't put you on the spot, but maybe in the next few minutes you could do a little bit of research. But it would be my guess that it could come back. I've had staff meeting with the chair and all of the commissioners at Multnomah County. I don't think we've received a solid commitment to a yes or a no vote. I think we have received a solid commitment to hear this conversation out, and I certainly intend to go with the Housing Bureau and others to answer any further questions that they may have.
So, Commissioner
But
Fritz,
they have asked for one thing. They've asked for time, and given the way we've structured this, this gives them approximately a month to do their evaluation, talk to their own staff, communicate with us, communicate with constituents and others who would have an interest. Sorry, Commissioner.
So my staff has been briefing me on this, and frankly, the more that I've learned about this, the more I like it. What I'm going to do, though, because it occurred to me that Director Shannon, if you don't mind me being informal, you call me Nick, I'll call you Shannon, that you had mentioned earlier that there were projects in the pipeline and a sense of urgency, that we might have this tool, let's capture them. What I might suggest is that I'll withdraw my request to take the emergency clause off and just ask the mayor to set this over a week with the emergency clause, because if the council's satisfied next week, we would have the benefit of an emergency clause on it. And I think there's some urgency. If the council continues to have questions, they retain the option to seek more time. I think that's to me, that's a better approach to this, because if we do concur next week in this program, I don't think a 30-day delay is warranted if you're telling us there are projects that might be willing to participate. So I'm going to withdraw my motion, and I will urge my colleagues, I would urge the mayor just to set this over a week.
So the emergency clause has been removed at the request of Commissioner
The amendment.
Fish.
No.
I'm sorry, the amendment.
I'm withdrawing my amendment, and I will urge the mayor to set it over for a week.
Very good.
So,
Commissioner Fritz.
I'm not committing to voting for it as an emergency next week either. Commissioner Fish, when you and I worked so hard with the county on setting up the multi-program or the revisions to it, we were very clear that we wanted to be in full collaboration with the county and indeed with the school districts, because they're affected also. So I will want to hear from the county what I would prefer not to do it as a here's what we've done, you can take it or leave it or amend it. It would be much better to have some kind of agreement ahead of time, in my opinion.
I'm ever the optimist. Maybe it's just a function of getting older, but I think by next week we may have greater clarity on that question, and I think it may be enough to satisfy your concerns.
Well, it'd be nice to have a briefing in the interim, thank you, although I know we have budget meetings all next week, so that might be challenging.
Mayor, is that an approach that you would concur with?
So to a point, I mean, first of all, I'd like to ask, is there any practical implications for this to set it over for 1 week?
No, I don't believe so. I mean, I think you could also decide what you wanted to do next week, whether you wanted to pass it on an emergency basis or otherwise. So you could always add
add or remove a clause at your
So
leisure.
I'm certainly willing to wait 1 week to have people have any further questions that are raised in the context of this hearing or otherwise addressed. I'm less persuaded by the argument that we should wait to see whether or not our county colleagues agree with us completely on this ordinance. We have a housing emergency. We have the Housing Bureau here at the City of Portland. We have very limited tools at our disposal to be able to reach back into the existing pipeline of projects that are permitted and ready to go that were vested prior to inclusionary housing, and I'm not prepared to give that tool up just because somebody gets concerns about whether or not we should do that. But if there is clarity coming from the county that they do not believe that the dollar for dollar trade-off between foregone future tax revenues is worth the discount to low-income people so that they can live in our community, I'll hear that conversation, but I'll never buy into it. So I just want to be really clear. I see this as a matter of urgency. I see this tool as being one that has been successfully used by the council previously. I can see no reason why we would not do this unless we don't really believe it's a housing emergency. Now, I'm willing to use whatever diplomatic skills and call in on friendships and everything else I can at the county to get their support. But frankly, I would hope that they would enthusiastically embrace a project like this and tools like this to get some immediate help for people who are lower income in the middle of a housing crisis.
So Mayor, I've been on this body for too long, and so I'm just going to offer just a slight rebuttal. Having spent a lot of time in Salem working to get the authorization for these programs, having spent the better part of a year with the county chair, then County Chair Jeff Cogan, working out the big look and coming up with a comprehensive rewrite that was acceptable to the county and the city, having spent time with the county assessor, who's a wild card in this, as you know from your county chair experience, the county assessor doesn't actually have to go along with anybody on a tax abatement, as we learned a number of years ago. I actually think we're on the verge of doing something with a broad base of support. I think your approach here of using multi and the tweaks that you proposed have convinced me it's the right approach. I think it's a sustainable victory if we convince a few other people to join us, but that won't be the determining factor in my vote.
No disagreement whatsoever. But I don't want to hear no if they have a better strategy and know of a tool that the Portland Housing Bureau is unaware of. I'm all ears.
Yep.
We have Commissioner Fritz. Sorry.
Thank you, Matt. Chair Kafori is second to nobody in her history of working for affordable housing. So the fact that she's not enthusiastically on board of this already is of concern to me. Let me be very clear. If Chair Kafori is not on board with it next week, I will not vote for it as an emergency.
All right. We have public testimony on this item. Is that the end of your presentation?
I thought you were going to show me what the multi-utilage has been in terms of how much of the cap have we been up to.
Oh, as far as on the current cap?
Yeah.
For 2017, I don't have the numbers at the top, but it's only been for projects approved through inclusionary housing, so it is not a great number.
So could you give me, in the
we can
week
certainly
between
follow
this
up
week
though
and
with
next
the exact,
on what has been the utilization since we did it back in 2000, whatever it was?
Yeah, absolutely. So 2012 is when we implemented the program after the Big Look.
Yeah.
And I can give you a full spectrum of all the foregone revenue.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Public testimony. I'm sorry, Commissioner Daly. I apologize.
I just wanted to express my general support and thankfulness for your efforts and for the Housing Bureau. I have not been lobbied by the county and met with the chairs recently last week, and this was not a topic of conversation. My understanding of where we're at with this item is limited, but I don't believe there's necessarily a disagreement on what we are ultimately proposing right now. I think there was some confusion, so I'm really hoping that we can come to a speedy agreement with the county. I mean, one thing that we haven't talked about, this $10,000 a unit tax abatement is a lot of money, but we're spending $200,000 of housing bond money to create one unit. So I really think we need to look at the larger picture. And I just want to go on record saying a couple things. As we know, we had a mad dash of developers getting in applications before our inclusionary housing program took effect. That's hundreds of developments, that's thousands, as many as 19,000 units of housing being built at market rate, which without a number is, I think, somewhat meaningless to the public. The housing that we're getting from the private market is housing that's only affordable to households at 120% of median family income or above. That's, I think, 95% of the housing that's been built in the private market over the last few years. There are proponents of density and development who want us to believe that our housing crisis is just a simple question of supply and demand, which is false, because when you have a gross product mismatch between what is being supplied at 120, which is above the median income, and the demand, which is below 100 median family income, it doesn't, we may see softening at the top of the market, and in fact, we see fairly high vacancy at the top of the market. It does not make any difference to people earning 80% or less of MFI. So I just really wanted to take this opportunity to say that publicly, because I'm really tired of the oversimplification of this issue that's going on. And just another thing to consider is, yes, there's foregone revenue, or yes, the landlords are, or not, sorry, the developers or the property owners are giving up rent, but we're actually helping them create housing that will be rented. It's tough to, perhaps nearly impossible to build at 60 to 80% right now, given just the cost of land and the expensive construction. So I think anything we can do within reason to help them deliver the housing we actually need is worthwhile. And finally, I would like to add that I also am very interested in the possibility of bumping affordable housing developments in the private market ahead in the queue as an additional incentive.
Commissioner, can I just make one comment?
Please.
Because I too believe the mayor has struck the right balance on this, and I think we can work out our differences within the family. There is a view that is getting some traction in the media. I call it trickle-down housing. And the idea is that if we continue to build at 95, if we continue to have 95% or more of our housing at the luxury level, that there will over time be a benefit to those people shut out of the markets. What I have said to some people I respect who adhere to that view is that that's not much solace for people who are today shut out of the market, which is why this council under this mayor's leadership has been focusing on putting subsidies and incentives into housing that is not being met by the marketplace. That's housing at below 60% of MFI. And number two, the idea that if you take the logic of what some economists have said, what they're really saying is that the person who is now can't find a sufficient number of luxury apartments to live in is going to go out to 158th and Powell and displace someone who's in a low-income housing unit run by Joe Weston. That is so preposterous on its face that it's not worthy of our discussion. I hope at some point we can recalibrate this discussion so that we say, let the private sector build whatever they want. Let's use some incentives to encourage them to add some affordable units, and then let's put as many dollars as we have into meeting the needs of people shut out of the market. That seems to me to be a sensible approach.
Yeah, that's well said, Commissioner Fish. And if I could just add one benefit here, is these are vested, a lot of them are permitted, and they're ready to go. And so there's an opportunity for us to act quickly. So part of what we would be buying down with that foregone revenue that's focused on the affordability is also timeliness. We could have housing online, within a year for some of these projects, which is 2 to 3 times faster than we're going to get with a project starting from scratch.
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
Good. So there's people who've been waiting very, very patiently to testify. Could we call, how many people do we have?
We have
Carl?
2.
All right, so if you could call them up, please.
Gwen Baldwin and Mary Sipe.
And while they're making their way up for their 3 minutes at the microphone, there were a couple of people who wanted to be here today and could not, as we changed the schedule. They wanted to provide oral testimony, so they provided written testimony in support of the ordinance, including the Urban League, the Welcome Home Coalition, and Mark Madden of WC Properties. And I apologize to those folks for the schedule change, but we do have their written testimony in support of the ordinance. Good afternoon.
Go ahead. Okay. Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler and members of the commission. Gwen Baldwin here representing Oregon Locus. Oregon Locus, as you may know, is a coalition of developers and investors who focus on walkable, livable urban development throughout the state. And I want to first thank the mayor and his staff for engaging in this conversation with Oregon Locus over a year ago. And it is not easy to find the right balance or the components of balance, but I really appreciate the willingness to work with it and to take the concepts and hand them to Interim Director Shannon Callahan and Assistant Director Matt Schibold to bring to you this program today. We think that this hits the mark in a number of areas that are really important. The balance between affordability and the duration of the tax exemption is important. The citywide application is important. The limited time duration to really incentivize action earlier than later in that queue is really important. We had 2 concerns and questions, one of which has been answered in a follow-up conversation with the Housing Bureau related to whether all the regulations and requirements for this program were within Section 3 or whether other aspects of the multi-program applied, which I think Commissioner Fish gets to some of your question about the number of, the affordable units versus all units, as well as is it 5-to-1 FAR built versus 5 to FAR zoned and when that is applicable. Getting clarity from them, then we are satisfied that that component of where that threshold is based on built, which is appropriate and will be a more workable program. The other area that we were wanting to draw attention to, and you've had some of that discussion today, is this program is measured against the status quo, measured against those who will move through the process with the projects that have been vested. And what are the incentives, what are the assists that can encourage inclusion of affordability in those projects as they move forward in the next couple of years. And my understanding is that there has always been a priority on the 60% MFI, and understandably why that is so. I would urge consideration of maybe dropping that inclusionary rate for the 60 to create an even higher incentive for people to incorporate that. I think this is a well-considered and well-thought-out program. I think they've done a really great job.
Gwen, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Because you're very thoughtful on these issues. If we adopt the proposal that is now on the table as amended with the cap, with the 20%, 20%, and the 10 years, do you anticipate that there are developers ready to take advantage of it?
I think there are those who would give a very serious look to it. I can't give a guarantee that there is somebody in the queue who is ready to grab this, in part because we just got the details of this. Everybody is, in fact, looking at it. Okay. I do think that the dynamic that all programs right now related to housing sit in is that uncertainty. Construction costs continue to go up. Equity investors continue to be somewhat skittish and fluid about what they're investing in. Any change adds to that uncertainty. So the more that we can say, we have really considered the incentive and the match to make this something that makes you want to move off of status quo, and that's really the measurement, the threshold. I think this is really close. My only advice would be if you wanted to turbocharge that look at the 60, you might want to consider lowering the threshold.
And my second question is, since this entire program comes up for reauthorization in the next couple of years in the legislature, do you think that your members would be receptive to at least considering the question as to whether the 10-year period is subject to an objective standard for renewal, particularly at the lower end?
I think we'd be happy to work with you on that and how the parameters work. I think that anytime you have
I know it has
really
to be an objective standard.
It's
has to be an objective standard.
Yes.
Because that's been drilled into my head by some of your members. But it does seem to me that if we are able to capture those units at 60%, we ought to at least have the option of allowing people to continue to stay in those units if the council believes that it's still, the math still pencils out.
Be happy to have that conversation and work with you to that.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you for your testimony. Good morning. Good
morning.
Afternoon, sorry.
Yeah, afternoon.
That
Time
ship
flies when you're
sailed.
having fun.
Yeah.
Mary Sipe. I just want to say that how excited I am to see this innovative idea come forward and the incentive here to try and capture what's already in the pipeline that perhaps we might not have been able to capture. I think this is a really innovative approach. I think that the conversation here has really been, you've touched on everything, and I think the balance, I especially appreciate the comments that Commissioner Udaley made. Once again, you're reading my mind back here. But and I guess what I would say is that one of the things is, I agree with Mayor Wheeler that I think there is some matter of urgency here. I also would want to really encourage, get out there and actively sell this. Don't just wait for the developers to say, gee, this really looks nice. Find a way to get out there and to promote this. The whole concept, the idea that all the affordable housing is in one building, rather than scattered throughout buildings all throughout the city. I really can't say enough about that concept. And, you know, the affordable units or subsidized, whatever you want to call the units in a building that has market rate units, they're not, they have the opportunity to do things such as not put in granite countertops and stainless steel appliances and hardwood floors and things like that, and make these units so that their maintenance and their upkeep and the cost of just constructing them within, you know, this project that's going to be market rate. There's a lot of things that they can do. You know, oftentimes when we've had conversations here about the affordable housing buildings all throughout the Pearl, the comment I often hear is, and you can't tell from the outside that it's affordable housing. Well, you can tell from the inside. And like I say, we don't have hardwood floors, we don't have stainless steel appliances, we don't have granite countertops. What we have is a comfortable, well-designed, habitable, affordable place to live. And I think the concept of providing incentive that is balanced, and that's the other thing I like is the balance here with what they get in return and what they give up. And spreading this throughout the city and throughout different buildings. I just can't say enough about how much I really appreciate the work that's gone into this. Kudos.
So I appreciate your testimony, and I look forward to selling this, because it's a rare day when you can sell something to somebody that doesn't really cost them anything extra,
Exactly.
but provides a discernible, tangible public benefit. So I look forward to that opportunity.
Yeah, good, go for it.
And Mary, we appreciate you.
Thank you.
Although it seems to me that you're not able to read my mind as easily as you're able to read her mind. So we'll talk about that privately.
No,
That's
it's
probably
the
a
other
good
way
thing.
around.
It's a good
I'm
thing.
reading all of your minds.
Get to the bottom of this.
If I could just quickly
Please.
add that
Yeah.
my office is in conversation with private developers who are vested in the queue, who are very interested in incentives for affordable housing. So I just want to lend to this urgency argument that there is real interest.
And we've also received some written testimony from some developers who've expressed that this is the right track. So I'm appreciative of that. Thank you both.
Thank you.
So
for your
Mayor, I
testimony.
am officially withdrawing my proposed amendment.
So Commissioner Fish has withdrawn his amendment. I'd like to keep my amendment open. We're going to set this over, continue this rather.
Why don't we vote on it, Mayor?
You want to vote on the amendment?
We've had a hearing.
Great. I'm happy to do that. None of my colleagues, my amendment, so I'll definitely support it.
I think it's
Restate the amendment, please.
So this was the one that lowers the cap to $500,000 from the $3 million.
And I've heard from others that the idea
Come on
of
up,
the cap.
please. There's a correction. I want to make sure we get this technically accurate.
Shannon Callahan
Thanks,
again.
Shannon.
So the mayor's amendment actually lowers each individual project's eligibility to $500,000 of tax exemption. It keeps the $3 million program size, but makes sure that no project can come in with a greater than $500,000 tax exemption.
Yeah, sorry for that confusion,
Just wanted to
because the
clarify.
per project also was originally at 3 million, so never mind. Call the roll.
I'm sorry, who seconded that?
Second. Oh.
Commissioner
I think it was Commissioner Fish.
The motion, was previously seconded by Commissioner Fish.
By Fish, okay, thank you. Fritz.
Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye, the amendment is adopted. So we'll move, we'll continue this to next week, is that correct?
Is that when you want this next week?
Yes.
Yes.
Good, so we will continue this to next week as amended. Thank you, everybody, good discussion. See, next item, and do we have everybody till 1 o'clock? Can people stick around for a few minutes? Great, 2:52. I'll work hard to get us done by then.
252, authorize a settlement and mutual release of claims agreement with Yu Hua Cho CNO Company LLC in an amount not to exceed $111,466 in return for the early termination of a commercial lease and satisfaction of Housing Bureau statutory requirements on certain real property located at 5020 North Interstate Avenue.
Colleagues, the proposed development at 5020 North Interstate, the property is an innovative mixed-income homeownership project between Proud Ground and the Portland Housing Bureau, consisting of 50 1-, 2-, and 3-bedroom condo and townhouse units, 41 of which will be affordable for incomes between 35% and 100% AMI. Since the property was purchased on July 27th, 2016, the commercial tenant Jay's Market, owned by Yunhua Chow and CNO Company LLC, the tenant, has continued to operate their convenience store business and make timely rent payments to the Portland Housing Bureau. Their presence has contributed to the neighborhood and maintained the property in decent condition while plans for project development continued to progress. The tenant has a substantial amount of time left on the lease of their property and is negotiating a settlement agreement with the Portland Housing Bureau in consideration for the early termination of the lease and vacation of the property so that it can be demolished and redevelopment can begin. And again, we have with us today, we have Javier Mena joining us as the Assistant Director of the Portland Housing Bureau, and of course we have Director Callahan here. Good afternoon again. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mayor. We're really pleased to be here because we've reached a satisfactory agreement with the local small business owner that helps compensate them and also helps us make way for this exciting new development. And we did want to preview a little bit of that development with you today because we are extremely pleased to be moving forward with a multifamily homeownership development in North Portland under the North and Northeast Portland strategy and subject to the preference policy. So with that, we'll just take an opportunity to show you one of our new projects coming forward.
Thank you, Shannon. Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. Javier Mena from the Housing Bureau. And as Shannon mentioned, this property was acquired in 2016, and with the purpose of land banking, which is one of the strategies created through the Northeast Neighborhood Housing Strategy, which had a tremendous amount of influence from the community, and land banking was a key component of that, of those strategies. So this property, as part of the process, was acquired. We didn't, at the moment that we acquired the property, had any ideas to exactly what we would want to develop on the site. Therefore, we wanted to keep that tenant in place, and as mentioned, it's a great tenant and have had great experience with them. In 2017, we put this property out for development. Proud Ground was the winning bidder, and so they had proposed a condo development, homeownership condo development, 50 units, 41 of which would be affordable, which in essence put the market not feasible in the future development. The property currently also is in dire need of repair, so really to try to keep the property there with the tenant, it's not feasible as well. So we reached this tentative agreement, which allows us to move forward with Proud Ground. They are in the final phases of developing their budget, but what you see in front of you, basically we're looking at 50 condos, 8 of which would be 1 bedroom, 22 2 bedroom, 14 3 bedroom, and some townhouses. As Shannon mentioned, home buyers to this property will be we're going through the preference policy, and this is a partnership between Proud Ground, Habitat for Humanity, and the African American Alliance for Homeownership. And with that, we'll take any questions.
Commissioner Fritz.
So it's listed as a mixed-use project. Is there retail space in here?
Right now, that's still in consideration. It's dependent upon funding. Worst case scenario, there's an active use of the ground floor, but Proud Ground, they will be looking at moving their offices to the area if they are not able to identify funding for the commercial space.
So it looks from the person's name that this is a minority business, and I'm just wondering if there was any consideration of allowing them first preference for if there is commercial space to go back into the building.
We did talk about it. There will be a challenge in terms of from the time that we're demolishing the building to when this actually would get built.
Right, but still.
And we don't know if, at this point, if there is what the planning would be or what the funding would be for that site. To the degree that we have had conversations with the store owner, and they would definitely be interested in staying in the building. We just cannot make that commitment.
Well, I appreciate that the 111,000 will get them through until it's finished. I would like to see there to be some commitment to inviting the owner of this business to come back if indeed it turns out that there is commercial space.
We'll do that.
Because it sounds from what you're saying is that they've been a beloved feature of the community and providing a good service. And so if that indeed is the case, then I think that would really round out the public benefits to me. I'll just leave that to you to move forward. I don't need an amendment on it.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Very good. Anything else, colleagues? Any public testimony on this item?
No one signed up.
Very good. With that, please call the roll.
Fritz.
Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Udaley.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. Thank you. To the Housing Bureau.
Mayor, can we do a housekeeping matter?
Yes.
I have to leave at 1. I know we have 2 second readings. Are these transportation things pretty straightforward?
So item 256, Commissioner Saltzman is asking that be moved to the 21st. So why don't we move to the vacation item number 255?
255, vacate a portion of Northeast Mark Street between Northeast 109th Avenue and Northeast 112th Avenue, subject to certain conditions and reservations.
Second reading, call the roll.
Fritz.
Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Udaley.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The ordinance is adopted. Item 253, and as you can see, folks, we are very close to losing our quorum, so quick is always good in this case. 253, please.
253, amend contract with Oregon Department of Transportation for the Northeast Columbia Boulevard at OR 99E MLK Junior Boulevard project.
Good. And colleagues, I just heard this will be our last item for the day. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. I'll keep this brief. This is a fairly straightforward amendment of an agreement with the Oregon Department of Transportation to move a milestone date and to modify some language pertaining to the Americans with Disabilities Act. Typically, we put these on consent. This was an older agreement that doesn't allow the commissioner in charge alone to sign it, so we had to come to you. So happy to answer any questions.
Well, before we get to that, I just want to mention that Ms. Gerlach's third grade class from Abernethy Elementary is on a History of Portland tour. So we welcome you here today. Thanks for coming to City Hall. Thank you. Awesome. All right, there's a lot going on here today, right? It's busy. Any questions?
253. Okay, thanks.
Any questions? Very good. Is there any public testimony on this item? Call the roll.
Fritz.
Thank you. Aye.
Thank you.
Fish.
Aye.
Udaley.
Aye.
Wheeler.
All right, the ordinance is adopted.
Thank you all.
Could you read items 254 and 256? They're both going to be moved.
Yes.
Mayor, after we do this reading and we move it and close the hearing, can we get a picture with these young people?
You want a picture with us? That sound good? All right, hang on for 1 minute. We have like one little bit of business we got to finish up, and then we're going to get a picture. Item 254, please.
254, vacate portions of Northeast Weidler Street and Northeast Halsey Street, subject to certain conditions and reservations.
At the request of the commissioner in charge, that's being moved to April 4th. Please read item 256.
256, create a local improvement district to construct street, sidewalk, stormwater, and sanitary sewer improvements in the Northeast 57th Avenue and Killingsworth Street Local Improvement District.
At the request of Commissioner Saltzman, that is being moved to the 21st. There being no further business, we are adjourned. All right, kids, let's come down here to the front, and then we can get everything.